Hi, this is Ben Roberts. Barbara Richards and I have prepared this presentation as part of the leadership training offered by Sociocracy for All. We'd like to discuss with you this idea of activating our networks through what we're calling pop-up sociocracy. Sociocracy is a system of governance that was developed for organizations and it began in the Netherlands back in the late 1970s. But we think that it's possible now in the new context that we exist in with the networks that are currently present to apply it as a way of organizing for action. You may have been a part of a Facebook group or a listserv or some other kind of a network where somebody had ideas. We said, hey, we should do something. And yet those efforts, while they may generate some initial energy, some light, some sparks, it's very hard to move from that into coordinated and aligned action. And so as a result, they often fizzle out. And yet, we also know that there are some kinds of actions or ideas that go viral and lead to very, very powerful impact, right? So our networks are clearly giving us the ability to take action and have impact in the world in ways that didn't exist before and that can operate without a clear organizational context. The question we want to explore with you is how we can be more intentional about using our networks to generate action in this way. Again, our networks give us so much possibility. We have lots of people who are there. They have wisdom and knowledge and skills. We have the ability with things like crowdfunding to raise money. We can broadcast and promote things. We can offer products. So there's all kinds of things that we can do through our networks without the presence of an organization. But what's missing is a governance structure that allows us to actually allocate authority and make decisions well. So if you've ever been a part of an effort that's a kind of a pop-up like this, you may have seen one or two of these common patterns. Either there's a single leader that is proposing things and people are choosing to follow them, and we're all familiar with many of the challenges and limitations and breakdowns that can be associated with that approach. Or you may see a group form where everybody wants to be involved in every conversation and every decision, and it's really quite hard to move past the talking stage into effective action or to come up with action that really reflects the best wisdom of the group. So either way, you may find results that are far from optimal, that fall way short of what's possible, and sometimes there's no action that takes place at all. Sociocracy, we think, offers the potential for a governance solution for networks, even when there's no desire to become a formal organization, or you may have an organization that actually created the network, a community practice that creates a listserv, for example, but you still don't have a desire on the part of the organizational structure to be the entity that coordinates action. So if anything's going to happen coming out of that network, it needs to be self-organized. And what is it that makes sociocracy potentially such a good solution in this case? Well, one of the things is this cycle of lead, do, measure. It's an agile approach to how you operate that can work very well in the more fluid and emergent kinds of contexts that networks are so good at navigating. You make a decision, you take action, you measure what happens, you make another decision. You don't get bogged down in this process, but you try to get a nice cycle, an iterative cycle flowing in this way. Another reason that sociocracy might work well in this ad hoc or pop-up basis is that if you had a single well-trained facilitator, someone who really understood sociocracy well, that they would be able to implement it on behalf of the ad hoc group. If you're in an organization that's looking to adopt this, you would typically do some fairly extensive training, so every member of the organization understood how sociocracy works before you implemented it. But in this kind of a pop-up situation, we think that one skilled facilitator could provide all of the wisdom and expertise needed in sociocracy to have the group be effective. And finally, because sociocracy has democracy really built into its DNA, everyone's voice is heard. And at the same time, it allows for efficient decision-making that leads to well-aligned action. We think that it really can be a way to operate in this ad hoc and pop-up context effectively. So how would this actually work? How do you get started? What are the key steps? Well, the first is that you need to find a trusted and experienced facilitator. If that person isn't present in the network, or you can't find someone who's willing to step up and support the network, then you're not going to be able to move forward. The second thing is that you need a clear aim. Now, this might have already emerged from the network's own conversations, where everyone really is clear, hey, we want to do X, Y, or Z. Or it might be that this is the first task of the group that's organizing sociocratically. But either way, if you don't have clarity on the general parameters of what you're trying to do, maybe not exactly how you're going to do it, but what you want to do, then sociocracy is not going to be able to to provide you with a way to move forward. The third thing you need clarity on is who's a member of the ad hoc group operating sociocratically, as opposed to people who are just part of the larger network. You need a clear boundary there, because it's only within that group that you're applying these principles and you have an actual way to allocate authority and make decisions effectively. And it's worth understanding that we're looking at fairly small groups here. Sociocracy operates in a series of circles. In this case, you might have one circle or maybe a small set of them that are linked together. But either way, those circles typically are going to have 6 or 7 people in them, as opposed to hundreds, thousands of people that may be present in a network or a set of networks. What are some of the basics for how sociocracy organizes people? The first is you've got your initial circle, you're aligned around an aim, you have a larger network that you can tap into, and within that circle, everyone who's a member has equal authority. No one is privileged in terms of their ability to direct what is taking place. You need to understand what skills are needed and allocate roles based on who's got those skills. And you operate in a series of rounds of conversation in which everyone has an equal voice and no single person can dominate the conversation. And finally, you develop proposals and policies through consent. And the idea of using consent as your decision-making method is a crucial distinction that's present in sociocracy. So it's worth diving in just a little bit to what makes that different. It begins with a proposal shaping process in which all voices are heard, again, in multiple rounds of conversation, where you're surfacing the various needs you're trying to address, the different sorts of considerations, some various possibilities for what you might try to accomplish in a proposal, what sorts of things you might do. But then, having had those rounds of conversation, a single proposal is then placed on the table. This could be the work of the facilitator, or the facilitator could choose one or more people to make that proposal. But either way, you've got one proposal that you're then trying to, making a decision about whether or not to adopt. And the job of the circle members at this point is to decide whether they consent to it. Is it safe enough to try? Does it move you towards your aim or not? Would it take you backwards? It's not whether this is the best thing that you think you should do. You don't hold out for what you would personally prefer. And if you get consent, then you're able to move forward, and that leads to faster cycles of action and learning. Now, getting to impact, this is where I think things get particularly interesting in this idea of a pop-up sociocracy, because you have the potential to engage the network as the source of power, even though the people operating sociocratically may be a very small subset of that network. So how would this happen? We're proposing that there's a spiral of engagement that can take place between the action circles that are organized sociocratically and that larger network. It begins with the circle internally coming up with a question or a set of suggestions or a specific proposal that they want to offer. They then take those out to the larger network to get input and feedback. And then that input and feedback is brought back into the circle where decisions are made and action is then can be coordinated. From there, the circle can invite the network or members of the network to help implement those decisions. Now, this is not a mandate. The only authority that exists is within the sociocratic circles themselves, and they don't have authority over the members of the network. But if the input and the feedback that's been received has been taken account of and the proposals are well considered, then the likelihood is you'll get some uptake from network members. So action is taken, and then you can measure the impact of that action, and the cycle can then repeat with new questions, new suggestions, new proposals. So in this way, you get these cycles of input from the network and action coordinated by the sociocratic circles. And we think that this can build momentum. So you get confidence that something powerful is emerging and it's worth becoming engaged and participating in this process if you're a member of the larger network and tapping into larger networks of networks that might be associated with this. And in this way, we think that really we might learn how to operate quite effectively without any sort of formal organizational structure present to coordinate any action. There are some additional possibilities to consider, in particular for the need for rapid reaction. We often are in a situation where something happens in the wider world and people are suddenly saying, hey, we should do this or that, we need to respond. But because things are happening fast and it may be chaotic, it's hard to leap into action in that moment. But if you do some advanced planning, you can improve the odds that you can respond effectively. And a key step would be to have a trained cohort of facilitators within the network already. So this is easy to do in advance, and then you have people who have relationships within the network. There's a context of trust that you can work with, as well as that basic core of skills. Another thing that could be quite valuable is to agree in advance on a set of policies that would lay the groundwork for any future engagement. So this could include being clear on the distinction between the authority that people have within the sociocratic group to make decisions versus the larger role of the network operating by invitation and providing input. It could also include some process for how you decide who might become a part of the sociocratic group, or what kinds of actions are appropriate for this network. For example, will you be comfortable making requests for funding? What other kinds of action are people willing to be invited to organize? What kinds of things might be inappropriate for this particular network? Now, things don't always come out the way we hope they will. So let's explore a few questions and challenges that might be associated with this idea of pop-up sociocracy. The first, again, is to recognize this is not typically how sociocracy is implemented. Usually you've got either a new organization that decides to govern itself in this way, or you have an existing one that wants to replace a more traditional approach, such as command and control, with a more democratic one. So this is really an untested concept that you can have a pop-up ad hoc group operating sociocratically. The idea of a clear and powerful aim, again, is essential to sociocracy working effectively, and there may be some special challenges in doing that in this more fluid and emergent context of a network. So we don't know exactly how well that can work. Sometimes it's really clear, but other times it may be hard to make that decision in a way that aligns with the larger impulses that are present in the network. Sometimes it's just hard to know how to act to and what to aim for. We may know that there's a need, that there's an issue, but in some of the larger kinds of contexts that networks operate in, things may be so complex that it's hard to know what exactly is worth trying to do. Another challenge may come in deciding who is a part of the sociocratic circles. Again, we're looking at a fairly small cohort that could be emerging out of a much larger network. So how to decide who is part of that cohort could be a tricky and challenging matter. And then once you have that cohort established, you may have people within it who are difficult or disruptive. This is actually a case where sociocracy provides a solution. You can have a proposal to remove someone from a circle, you can discuss that in rounds, and you can ask for consent to that person's removal. In this case, that one person would have to abstain from the process. But if the circle decides that having them present is actually preventing moving forward on the aim of the circle, then it's appropriate to remove them. A related but slightly different situation could happen if you have alignment in the sociocratic circles and they're proposing action that's getting uptake in the larger network, but there are people within the network or cohorts that don't actually like the course that's being taken. And they don't have authority to object to that, so they might choose to leave the network or create other kinds of disruption. And there's an important question in terms of how that might be handled. What probably makes sense in that case is that the action circles will recognize that this issue exists, and they may, say, let's call a halt to this, and they may ask for more feedback or input or try to float a different proposal, perhaps consult directly with the cohort that's having some issues. It may also be possible that in this particular network, it's okay if there's a group that doesn't like what's going on, because that's just not really a concern for the way that network is organized and functions. In conclusion, there's this famous quote from Margaret Mead, which she offered in the mid-20th century, around the power of a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens to change the world. Now, obviously, we didn't have the capacities that we currently do. We weren't networked together in the ways that we only recently have been. And it's really important to just remind ourselves how new this is, and that we're only just beginning to learn how to engage these capacities and really to think of ourselves as one human family. So we're like children exploring these new possibilities together. And so you have to ask yourself, once we become really skilled at organizing without an organizational context, what might be possible? what are we really capable of? And recognize that we've only begun to even attempt to tap into these new capacities in ways that might be effective. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation on pop-up sociocracy. If you're interested in sociocracy in general, or in exploring this idea of applying pop-up sociocracy to a network that you're a part of, we encourage you to contact the folks at Sociocracy for All, where you can find free resources online, as well as courses and other kinds of support for anything related to sociocracy.